the ring they couldn't afford. The morning was cold with a soft wind drifting through the streets of downtown Los Angeles. People walked quickly, clutching their coats and coffee cups, their eyes tired, their minds already at work. Among them was a young couple, Clara and Jake, walking hand in hand. They didn't look rich. Their clothes were plain, a bit worn out. Clara wore a faded yellow cardigan and Jake had on a second-hand jacket with a broken zipper he had to keep closed with one hand. But the way they smiled at each other, anyone could see they were in love. They had been saving for months, every penny Jake made fixing cars at a local garage, and every tip Clara earned waiting tables at a small diner had gone into a jar on top of their fridge. Clara had stopped buying makeup. Jake had started skipping lunch. They didn't complain, not once. Because today was the day Jake was going to buy an engagement ring. Not a big one, not a fancy one. Just a simple ring that showed Clara how deeply he loved her. They walked past designer stores and tall glass windows filled with diamonds and gold. Jake's hand was sweaty. Clara squeezed it and smiled. "You sure about this?" she asked gently. He nodded. "You deserve this, Clara. More than anything." They reached a jewelry store on a corner. Polished glass, golden handles, and a chandelier inside that sparkled like 1,000 stars. Jake had walked past this store many times, always, thinking it was out of reach. But last night he had counted the money again. They had just enough for a simple silver ring with a small sapphire he saw in the display weeks ago. As they stepped inside, the warm lights and soft classical music made everything feel like a dream. Clara's eyes widened at the shine, the way everything glowed. A woman behind the counter looked up. She was tall with perfect makeup, expensive earrings, and a tight smile. She looked at Clara and Jake slowly. Her eyes stopped at Jake's jacket, then Clara's scuffed shoes. "Can I help you?" she asked, but her tone already carried judgment. Jake cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to see the silver ring with the sapphire. I believe it's still in the front case." The woman raised an eyebrow. "That one starts at $800. Jake nodded, reaching into his pocket. He had brought the cash, neatly stacked and wrapped in a rubber band. The woman didn't move. Instead, she glanced at another employee, a younger man in a black suit, who walked over. He whispered something in her ear. Both of them looked at the couple again, not bothering to hide their smirks. "Sir," she said, her voice growing cold. "This store has strict standards. We can't allow people to loiter. If you are just browsing, I suggest you leave." Jake's mouth fell open. "I'm not browsing. I'm here to buy that ring. I have the money right here." "Cash?" the young man scoffed. "How do we know? That's not fake." Clara stepped closer to Jake, her cheeks burning with shame. "Please," she said softly. "We just want to see the ring. We're not here to cause any trouble." "No," the woman said, crossing her arms. "You don't belong here. Please leave before I call security." They were stunned. Jake tried again, pulling out the cash to show her, but she stepped back like it was dirty. The young man walked to the door and opened it wide. "You heard her. Out." People in the store were staring now. Clara grabbed Jake's hand and pulled him toward the door, her eyes full of tears. Jake kept his head down, holding the cash tightly. He didn't want to cause a scene. He just wanted to get Clara a ring. But now they were being kicked out like thieves. They stepped onto the sidewalk. The cold wind hit them again, but this time it felt different. Sharper. Crueler. "I'm so sorry," Jake whispered. "I wanted this to be special." Clara shook her head. "It's not your fault. We don't need a ring to know we love each other." Behind them, inside the jewelry store, a man had been watching the entire scene unfold. He had entered quietly just moments before, wearing a black cap, sunglasses, and a long coat. Nobody noticed him. Nobody except the young employee, who had looked up and paused but said nothing, thinking the man was just another customer. That man was Keanu Reeves. He stood there silent, as the couple was humiliated, as the employees laughed. As the door slammed behind them, he didn't move right away. He just watched them walk down the sidewalk, heads low, hands still tightly locked together. Then he slowly took off his sunglasses. Keanu had been in the area for a quiet brunch with a close friend. He wasn't one to make big appearances or draw attention to himself. He liked walking alone, thinking about life, noticing small things others missed. And today, he had noticed Jake and Clara before they even entered the store. He had seen the nervous way. Jake glanced at the window display. The way Clara encouraged him with a smile. It reminded Keanu of something. No, someone from his past. A moment long buried in his heart. A love he once had before fame, before fortune, before the world had turned his life upside down. He hadn't meant to follow them into the store. It just happened, like something tugged at him. And when he saw how they were treated, something deep inside him stirred. Keanu stepped toward the counter. The woman's smile returned instantly. "Good afternoon, sir," she said brightly, unaware of who he was. "Looking for something special?" Keanu nodded. "Yes," he said calmly. "I saw a silver ring with a sapphire." "Ah, yes," she replied, hurrying to the case. "A beautiful choice. It's very popular among our higher-end clients." The young man behind the counter tried to smile too. "You've got a good eye." Keanu looked at both of them carefully. "Can I ask something?" "Of course," the woman chirped. "Why did you turn that couple away?" His voice was steady but piercing. The woman blinked. "What couple?" "The ones who were just here." "You said they didn't belong." "Why?" She faltered. "Well, sir, you have to understand. We get a lot of people pretending to buy things. Sometimes it's better to ask them to leave before things get uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable for who?" Keanu asked. The young man stepped in. "Sir, we're just doing our job. They didn't look like serious buyers." Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet. Inside was a platinum card that made the woman's eyes widen. He placed it on the counter without a word. Then he looked straight into her eyes. "You just kicked out the most serious buyers you'll ever meet, not because they couldn't afford it, but because you judged them based on how they looked. You didn't even let them speak." The woman stammered. "Sir, we had no idea." "No," Keanu interrupted. "You didn't care, but I do." He took the ring from the case and held it in his hand. It sparkled under the lights. "I want to buy this ring, not for me, not for someone I know, but for them. And I want you to deliver it. Today." "Sir?" "You heard me. You're going to apologize to them in person, and you're going to hand them this ring. And if you don't, I'll make sure the whole world knows what just happened here." The woman looked pale. The young man didn't speak at all. Keanu placed the ring and the card on the counter. "Charge whatever you want. Just make it right." Then he turned and walked out. Clara and Jake sat on a park bench a few blocks away. They weren't speaking. Jake had his head in his hands. Clara leaned against him, quiet. Then they heard footsteps. They looked up and saw the woman from the store holding a small velvet box. She looked uncomfortable. Behind her stood the young man, his face red with shame. I came to say I'm sorry," she said. They stared at her. "This is for you," she added, handing the box to Clara. Jake took it, confused. He opened it slowly. It was the sapphire ring. "We were wrong," she said, voice trembling. "Someone saw what happened, and they wanted to make it right." Before they could ask who, she turned and walked away quickly, the young man following, her without a word. Jake held the ring, speechless. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "But who?" she whispered. Behind a tree across the park, a man stood watching. Just for a moment. He smiled. Then he turned and disappeared into the city. Keanu Reeves never asked for thanks. He never needed credit. All he wanted was to remind the world of something simple. Kindness still mattered. Respect still mattered. And sometimes, even in the coldest moments, a stranger could change your life forever. Whispers in the wind, Clara and Jake sat in silence. for a long time after the woman from the jewelry store left. The sapphire ring rested in Jake's palm, glinting in the soft afternoon light. He turned it slowly, trying to understand how this had happened. The shame of being kicked out still lingered in his chest, but now it mixed with confusion, disbelief, and hope. Clara leaned against his shoulder, holding back tears. "Someone did this for us," she whispered. "But who?" Jake shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but they must have been in the store. They saw everything." "Why would a stranger do that?" Clara asked, looking around as if the person might still be nearby. Jake glanced toward the trees. For a second he thought he saw someone, a man in a long coat walking away. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. He held the ring up between them. "This is real, right?" Clara smiled softly. "Feels like a dream." Jake took a deep breath. Then, with trembling fingers, he slid off the bench and knelt on one knee. Clara gasped and covered her mouth. "I didn't plan it like this," he said. "But maybe it's perfect anyway." Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she said before he could even ask. He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. And in that moment, surrounded by city sounds and a quiet sky, they laughed. Not because everything was easy, not because life had suddenly become fair, but because something beautiful had happened when they least expected it. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves sat alone in a nearby cafe sipping a cup of tea. His hood was pulled low, sunglasses back on, and no one recognized him. That's how he liked it. He watched through the window as the couple embraced in the park, their heads touching, their joy so quiet and pure it almost hurt to witness. He thought back to years ago, before the world knew his name, when he was just another struggling actor in Toronto. He remembered walking into a shop once, looking for a small gift for someone he loved. He didn't have much money, just a few crumpled bills. The clerk had laughed at him, told him to try the clearance bin. He never forgot that sting. How it made him feel like he didn't matter, like he wasn't enough. But he also remembered something else. Later that same week, a stranger at a bus stop had seen him shivering and handed him a scarf without a word. It wasn't new, it wasn't fancy, but it was warm and kind. That scarf had meant more to him than anything he could have bought. And today, he had passed that kindness on. Keanu finished his tea and stood up. He left a generous tip on the table and disappeared into the crowd. The next morning, Clara and Jake returned to their small apartment. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom above a noisy laundromat, but today, it felt like a castle. Clara placed the ring box gently on the windowsill where sunlight could reach it. As Jake cooked eggs in the kitchen, Clara opened her phone. She hadn't posted anything about what happened. She hadn't told anyone. It felt too strange, too big to explain. But as she scrolled through the news, something caught her eye. A headline: "Mystery man buys engagement ring for couple kicked out of luxury store." Her heart stopped. She tapped on the article. It was short, with a grainy photo taken by someone outside the store. The angle was distant, but Clara recognized herself and Jake being led out by the employee. Next to the article was a blurry image of a man in a long coat, wearing sunglasses. "Jake," she called out. He rushed over, spatula still in hand. "Look." They read the article together. There was no name, no confirmation of who the man was, just rumors. Some comments below the post were guessing, maybe a rich businessman, maybe a local celebrity. One person even joked, what if it was Keanu Reeves? Jake and Clara looked at each other, eyes wide. "No way," Clara whispered. "But what if?" Jake started, then trailed off. They both knew it sounded impossible, but something deep inside them wondered. Later that afternoon, a knock came at their door. Jake opened it cautiously. A man in a delivery uniform stood there holding a small white envelope. "You're Jake Sanders?" Yeah." The man handed him the envelope. "This was dropped off at the station this morning. No return name, just instructions to deliver it personally." "Thanks," Jake said, closing the door slowly. Clara joined him as he opened the envelope. Inside was a card, handwritten, neat, simple. The world can be cold, but never let it change your warmth. Your love is worth more than any diamond. Pay it forward when you can. A friend, no signature, no clue, just a message. Clara clutched the note to her chest. This feels like a movie. Jake nodded. Yeah, but we're living it. He looked at her, then at the ring again. We have to find him, he said, but how? I don't know, Jake replied, but we have to try. What they didn't know was that while they searched for answers, the story was spreading. A local reporter had picked up the post and wanted to investigate. The news segment aired the next day. A clip from security footage at the jewelry store showed a tall man confronting the employees. Though grainy, his stance, his walk, it was familiar to some viewers. Then came the voice recordings, not leaked, but captured accidentally by another customer's smart device. They played just a few seconds on air. You judged them based on how they looked. You didn't even let them speak. Those words echoed across social media, the calm, steady voice, full of quiet strength. People began comparing the voice to interviews of Keanu Reeves, and the theory grew louder. Within hours, the internet was buzzing. Was it really Keanu? Jake's phone rang that evening. It was his cousin who lived across town. Dude, he said breathlessly, are you famous now or something? What are you talking about? You're all over the news. People think Keanu Reeves bought you a ring. Jake nearly dropped the phone. No, you're joking. Check Twitter, and Reddit, and TikTok. It's everywhere. Jake hung up and opened his browser. There it was. Dozens of posts, reaction videos, breakdowns of the voice, even side by side, analysis of the man's height and walk. The world was on fire with curiosity, and through it all, Jake and Clara remained quiet. They didn't want to chase fame. They didn't want to become someone else's story. But deep down, they knew they had been given something precious. Not just a ring. Not just a moment. They had been given a chance to remind people what love looked like. What kindness could do. Days passed. And then one afternoon, Jake received an email. The address was strange. No name, just a series of letters and numbers. But the message was short. Meet me at 8 p.m., the old observatory, come alone. He showed it to Clara. It has to be him, she whispered. You think it's safe? She nodded. Go. I trust it. That night, Jake stood under the stars at the old observatory. The city lights twinkled below and the wind carried the scent of pine and night air. He waited. Minutes passed, then footsteps approached. A tall man stepped into the clearing. No sunglasses this time. No coat. Just Keanu Reeves. Jake froze. You, he breathed. Keanu smiled. Me. Why did you do it? Jake asked. Keanu stepped closer. Because I saw myself in you. And because the world needs reminders. Of what? Keanu looked up at the stars. That no matter how dark things get, love is still worth everything. And kindness, it still matters. Jake didn't know what to say. His throat was tight. You didn't have to come here, he said. Yes, Keanu replied. I did. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A silver key. What's this? Jake asked. It's for a box. I left. It had a bookstore downtown. Inside are letters, stories, pieces of me I've never shared. I want you to have them. Why me? Because you'll know what to do with them. Then Keanu nodded once and walked away, leaving Jake under the stars, holding a key to something far greater than he could imagine. The key to something greater. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of their bed, holding the silver key in his hand. It was small, smooth, and cold. It didn't look like much, but he could feel the weight of it. Not just metal, but meaning, stories, secrets. Clara stirred under the covers and opened her eyes. You okay? Jake nodded. He gave me a key. She blinked. To what? He said there's a box waiting at a bookstore downtown, with letters, stories, from his life. Clara sat up slowly. You're going to go, right? I have to. The next morning, the city buzzed like always. Cars honked, people hurried, dogs barked. But for Jake, the world felt quieter somehow, heavier, more focused. He stood in front of a small bookstore tucked between two office buildings. It looked old, with dusty windows and a crooked sign that read, Whitman's Books. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. She was older, her gray hair tied in a bun, and she wore a green sweater that looked handmade. You must be Jake, she said before he spoke. His eyes widened. How did you know? She pointed to a wooden box on the counter. He told me you'd come. He said not to ask questions, just to give you this. Jake stepped forward slowly. The box was beautiful. Carved wood, smooth edges, and an old brass lock. The key in his pocket fit perfectly. As he turned it, the lock clicked open with a soft sound. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, neatly folded, tied with ribbon. At the top was a note written in the same handwriting as the card he had received. These are parts of my soul. Use them well. For the next several days, Jake and Clara sat together every night, reading one letter at a time. The letters told stories from Keanu's past, things the public never knew. There were stories of pain, of losing loved ones, of sleeping in his car during hard times. There were stories of friendship, of strangers who helped him when he had nothing. There were even letters about the movies, what he learned from playing characters and how they mirrored his real emotions. One letter read, I once gave a man my jacket in the snow. He didn't ask. I just remembered what it felt like to freeze and have no one see you. Another said, after my sister got sick, I stopped believing in fairness, but I never stopped believing in people. Clara cried through some letters. Jake sat silently through others, gripping her hand. These were not just stories. They were lessons. Pieces of one man's journey through light and darkness, given to two people who had nearly been crushed by a single moment of judgment. But as powerful as the letters were, one stood out. It was buried near the bottom of the box. Older than the others, the paper yellowed slightly at the edges. Dear reader, if you're reading this, you must be someone who still believes in goodness. I don't know where life will take you. I don't know if you'll ever need this. But I do know one thing. This world doesn't need more noise. It needs more light. And sometimes the smallest act can become someone's turning point. If you ever find yourself with a platform, even a small one, use it. Speak for those who can't. Show the world that compassion isn't weakness, that empathy is still power. The world watched me on screens, but I've been watching the world in silence. And I see you. Keanu. Jake stared at the letter for a long time. Then he looked at Clara. We can't keep this to ourselves. They didn't want fame, but they knew the story needed to be told the right way. With honesty, with heart, without exaggeration. So Jake reached out to a local podcast host, someone known for telling real stories, not chasing gossip. The host, a young woman named Maya, agreed to meet them in a quiet studio downtown. When they arrived, Maya welcomed them warmly. She offered tea. She didn't rush. She didn't push. Just tell me what happened, she said softly. In your own words. So they did. They told her about the jewelry store, the humiliation, the mysterious gift, the email, the meeting under the stars, and the box of letters. They didn't name Keanu directly. They just called him the stranger. But Maya was smart. She connected the dots. After the recording ended, she looked at them carefully. Are you sure you want to share this? Jake nodded. Not for us, for the people who need to hear it. Then I'll do it right, she promised. The episode went live the next day. It didn't explode instantly. There were no flashing headlines, no breaking news. But slowly, steadily, people listened. A woman in Ohio played it while cooking dinner and cried into the rice. A high school student in France played it on her bus ride and smiled for the first time that week. A man who hadn't spoken to his father in years called him after listening just to say hi. And somewhere in a quiet apartment in Los Angeles, Keanu Reeves listened too. He didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Meanwhile, something unexpected began to happen. People began writing in. They sent letters, emails, voice messages. I was treated like I didn't belong too. Thank you for sharing this. I gave someone my coat yesterday. I thought of your story. I didn't believe in good people anymore, but maybe they still exist. And then came the offers. Publishers wanted to print the letters as a book. Filmmakers wanted to turn the story into a movie. Talk shows wanted interviews. But Jake and Clara said no to most of it. They didn't want a spotlight. They wanted to protect the purity of the moment. But they agreed to one thing: a website. They called it the Silver Ring Project. The idea was simple. People could share their stories of unexpected kindness. They could send a letter, anonymously if they wished. Every month, one story would be chosen and turned into a short animated video. The first story was theirs. The second was from a woman who gave her last $20 to a stranded traveler. The third came from a boy who stood up for a bullied classmate and ended up changing the whole school's culture. The project grew. People from around the world began tuning in, and in quiet corners of the internet, people whispered the same thought. Was this really all? Started by Keanu Reeves? No one knew for sure. But Jake and Clara did, and so did Keanu. One evening, Clara received a message through the website's inbox. It was brief. The ripple has become a wave. Proud of you both. Keep going. Kay. She smiled, tears in her eyes. He's still watching, she whispered. Jake walked over and kissed her forehead. Always. But just when they thought the story had reached its peak, something new happened. Something bigger. A young girl in New York, diagnosed with a terminal illness, posted a video thanking the Silver Ring Project for giving her hope. She said the stories made her feel seen, made her believe the world was still beautiful even if she didn't get to see all of it. Her video went viral. Millions watched, and among those millions was a producer at a major studio. She reached out with a different kind of offer, not a flashy movie, not a big budget production, but a documentary. Real people. Real voices. Real kindness. Jake and Clara agreed, on one condition: every dollar made would go to families in crisis. They called the documentary Whispers of Light. And in the final scene, as the credits rolled, a single quote appeared on screen. Sometimes, even in the coldest moments, a stranger can change your life forever. No name, no face, just a whisper, but the world heard it. The Man in the Shadows, the premiere night of the documentary, Whispers of Light, arrived quietly. There were no flashing lights, no red carpet, just a simple theater in downtown Los Angeles where people from all walks of life sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the story to begin. Jake and Clara were in the back row. Clara wore a soft blue dress Jake had saved for weeks to buy. Jake wore the same secondhand jacket he'd worn the day he walked into the jewelry store. He said it reminded him of where they started. As the lights dimmed, a hush fell over the room. The screen came to life, not with drama or actors, but with real people, real tears, and real hope. Stories from all around the world unfolded, stories sparked by that one small act of kindness. A school in India had created a kindness tree, where students pinned notes about good things they saw others do. A prison in Brazil started a program where inmates wrote apology letters to people they had hurt, inspired by one of the letters Keanu had written in his box. In one scene, a homeless man in Chicago talked about how someone left a sandwich, a blanket, and a handwritten note that simply said, "You matter." He smiled through missing teeth. That note saved my life. Jake and Clara cried through half the film, not because they were sad, but because they could see how a single moment in their own life had turned into 1,000 ripples. When the lights came up, no one clapped. They sat in silence, a sacred silence. Then one by one people stood and embraced, strangers beside them. Hands were held. Names were shared, the kind of connection the world rarely allowed anymore. As Jake and Clara made their way outside, a small child ran up and hugged Clara around the legs. "Thank you," she said in a shy voice. "My mom said your story made her want to live again." Clara knelt down, holding back tears. "What's your name?" "Hannah." "Well, Hannah," Clara whispered, "you're the reason we keep going." After the premiere, things changed, not just for Jake and Clara, but for people they would never meet. The website began receiving hundreds of letters a day. They had to recruit volunteers, retired teachers, college students, even former therapists, people who just wanted to help sort through the growing river of hope. The Silver Ring Project became a movement. Classrooms used it to teach empathy. Churches and mosques shared the videos during sermons. One police department in a small town in Georgia played the podcast episode during their training on compassion. One afternoon, Clara received a letter from a teenager in Korea. "I was planning to, in my life, but I listened to your story and I cried for the first time in months. I think maybe the world has a place for me." Jake read the letter 3 times before speaking. "We have to do more." Clara looked at him. "What do you mean?" "We need to find more stories, help more people, but we can't do it alone." So they started a fund, not for themselves, but for those who had stories but no voice, those who had suffered but were too tired to speak, those who were kind in silence and never expected thanks. And they named the fund after the very first letter from the box, the Ripple Letter Fund. Then one night, something strange happened. A man arrived at their door. He was older, maybe in his 60s. His suit was clean but simple. He wore glasses and held a small leather case in his hand. "Are you Jake Sanders?" he asked politely. "Yes," Jake said cautiously. The man nodded. "May I come in?" Clara looked at Jake. He hesitated, then stepped aside. The man sat down on their small couch and opened the case. Inside was a folder. "I work in legal affairs for Mr. Reeves," the man said calmly. "You'll understand if I don't use his first name much. Privacy is very important to him." Jake and Clara nodded. "He sent me here to deliver something not even he expected to give." He opened the folder and slid a document across the table. It was a legal transfer of ownership. Jake read the words twice before understanding. What is this?" he stammered. "It's the deed to a building downtown," the man replied. "He's giving it to you." "A building?" "An old theater. He bought it years ago, kept it closed, always said he'd know what to do with it one day. Now he says, it's yours." Clara stared at the paper, stunned. "Why us?" The man smiled. "Because he believes you'll make it more than a building." 2 weeks later, Jake and Clara stood in front of the old theater. The letters were faded and the windows covered in dust, but Jake could see the bones underneath. Beautiful. Bones, strong bones, the kind you don't tear down. They decided to name it the Ripple Stage, and it wasn't just a theater. It became a sanctuary, a place where anyone could stand up and tell their story. No cameras, no internet, no applause needed. Just a microphone, a spotlight, and listening hearts. One night, a young woman stepped up and said she had never spoken in public before. She talked about being abandoned, about growing up in the foster system. But then she smiled and said someone left a letter. In her locker once, an anonymous note that said, "You are not invisible." "That letter kept me going," she said. "And tonight I want to thank whoever wrote it." Another night, an older man, a veteran, walked up in silence. He held a letter in his hands. It was written by his daughter who had passed away years ago. He read it aloud and wept in front of strangers who wept with him. The Ripple Stage became holy ground, and people started traveling from all over to see it. Not because of Jake or Clara, not even because of Keanu, but because something rare had happened here. Truth was allowed, kindness was trusted, and pain was welcomed without shame. One evening, after the final speaker had left the stage, a figure walked through the back door. He didn't say anything at first, just stood at the edge of the theater and looked around. Jake turned, heart racing. Keanu Reeves smiled. "You really made something here," he said. "We just followed your light," Jake replied. "No," Keanu said. "You lit your own fire. I only gave you the spark." They sat together in the back row for a while. No cameras, no crowds. Just two men who knew what it felt like to carry both grief and grace. "Do you ever regret staying in the shadows?" Jake asked quietly. Keanu thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but not today." They sat in silence. Then Keanu reached into his pocket and handed Jake one last envelope. "Open this when you're ready," he said. Then he walked out the same way he came in. Jake waited 2 days before opening the envelope. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was more personal this time, more raw. "This is the last thing I'll give you, and it's the most dangerous. Not because it hurts, but because it calls you to something bigger. Inside this envelope is the story I never told anyone. Not the press, not the world, not even my closest friends. If you share it, do it carefully, because it will change things." Beneath the letter was a second page, and as Jake read it, his hands began to tremble. He looked at Clara. "What is it?" she asked, worried. Jake stared at her, his eyes wide. "He gave us his story," he whispered. "The one the world never knew." The secret chapter. The letter in Jake's hands was heavier than paper. It was history. It was pain. And it was a choice. He sat at the kitchen table, the words from Keanu's first page echoing in his mind. "This is the most dangerous thing I'll ever give you." Clara sat across from him, her hand resting gently on his. "You don't have to read it aloud," she said softly. But Jake shook his head. "No. We started this together. We finish it together." He unfolded the second page. The handwriting was slightly shakier, the ink darker in places where the pen had lingered. "I was 17 when I ran away from home. Most people don't know that. They think my life began in front of a camera. But before the lights, before the scripts, I was just a boy trying to survive. My father, he left early, too early, and the silence he left behind grew louder every year. My mother loved us, but she was tired, always tired. She worked 2 jobs, and I stopped asking for anything by the time I turned 12. One winter night, I came home to find the power shut off. The fridge was empty. The apartment was freezing, and I saw her sitting there crying, thinking I was asleep. I never forgot that image. I left the next morning with a backpack and $23. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears. She reached for Jake's other hand. Jake continued, reading. "I lived under a bridge for 3 days, then on the roof of a bookstore for 2 weeks. A kind woman who worked at a diner noticed me one morning. I hadn't eaten in almost 4 days. She brought me a sandwich wrapped in napkins and said, 'You don't owe me anything. Just stay kind.' Her name was Martha. She saved my life. Later, when I got my first acting job, I sent her a letter. Never heard back, but I hope she knew. I never told anyone this because I was afraid people would see me as weak. But now, watching what you've built, I realize weakness isn't what you survive, it's what you hide. So this is me, unhidden. Do what you feel is right with this." "Keanu," Jake folded the letter slowly. The room was silent. "He gave us his real beginning," Clara whispered. "He gave us his soul," Jake replied. They didn't know what to do at first. The Ripple stage had grown. The website had grown. The stories were pouring in faster than ever. And now, they had a piece of truth so raw, so human, it could shake the world. But Jake remembered the line from the first letter. If you ever find yourself with a platform, even a small one, use it. He and Clara stayed up late that night writing. Not a post, not a headline, not a viral clip, just a simple story. They called it The Bridge Boy. They didn't name Keanu. They didn't show the letter. They just told the story. About a teenage boy who left home in silence, survived in shadows, and grew into a man who gave without expecting thanks. They released it as an anonymous post on the Silver Ring website. They had no idea what would happen next. Within 24 hours, it had 2 million views. Within 3 days, 10 million comments flooded in. This story, I feel like I lived it. How many bridge boys do we pass every day and never see? This changed how I treat strangers. People began sharing their own experiences. Of homelessness, of hunger, of silent survival. A woman posted that she had once been Martha. She had worked in a diner near Toronto in the late 80s. She remembered giving a sandwich to a quiet teenager who looked like he hadn't slept. Her message read, "He looked so scared. I hope he's okay." Jake and Clara cried when they read it. They sent her a message back, gently confirming that she had saved a life. But not everyone was silent about the identity of the boy in the story. A journalist known for deep celebrity pieces picked up the post. She analyzed it, line by line, word by word. And then she wrote a piece of her own titled, "Has Keanu Reeves finally told us the truth?" It went viral instantly. The media storm exploded. Headlines filled every corner of the internet. Was the Silver Ring project started by Keanu Reeves? The Hollywood star behind the kindness movement? Bridge boy revealed? Cameras showed up outside the Ripple stage. Reporters called nonstop. But Jake and Clara said nothing, not because they were hiding, but because they were protecting something sacred. Then, something happened that no one expected. Keanu Reeves posted. For the first time in years, he made a public statement. Just one message. The story is true, and the kindness is real. I just wanted to remind the world that people matter, that love matters, and that silence doesn't mean absence. Thank you for listening. There was no video, no photo, just those words, and the world stopped talking for a moment and started listening again. After that, everything changed. A major network offered to fund community theaters around the country, modeled after the Ripple stage. Nonprofits asked Jake and Clara to help them build programs that trained young people in emotional storytelling. Teachers wrote in, asking for school versions of the Ripple letters. And then, one evening, Jake and Clara got a call from the office of the mayor. They were being honored at a city ceremony for their work. But when the night came, they didn't walk in alone. Keanu Reeves was waiting in the hallway, dressed simply, no press around him. "You sure about this?" Jake asked. Keanu smiled. "They're not cheering for me, they're cheering for the world you helped them see." The ceremony was quiet, respectful. When Jake spoke, he didn't talk about himself. He talked about the bridge boy, the woman with the sandwich, the jewelry store moment, and how a single small act turned into a river of compassion. "We don't need fame," he said. "We need fire. Inside us, the kind that spreads warmth to others." Clara added, "We were kicked out of a store, but the world let us in." The audience stood in silence. Then someone in the back clapped, and another, until the room was filled with applause, not loud or wild, but soft and steady, like a heartbeat. But later that night, back at their apartment, Jake opened one final letter he hadn't read yet. It had been tucked at the very bottom of Keanu's box. No ribbon, no note, just a small torn piece of paper with one line. "You have done more with my story than I ever could. Now, what will you do with your own?" Jake stared at the words for a long time. Then he smiled. He looked at Clara. "I think it's time." "For what?" she asked. "To tell people who we really are. Aren't we already doing that?" "No," Jake said. "We've been telling his story. It's time we tell our own." What Jake meant was bigger than biography. He meant they would start something new. They would travel city to city, town to town, listening, lifting voices, helping others turn pain into power. And they would document every moment, not to go viral, but to show others how to do the same. They didn't want to be influencers. They wanted to be igniters of compassion, of connection, and of courage. The Ripple stage would stay open, but the next chapter would be on the road before they left. Keanu visited one last time. No words were spoken. He handed Jake a small wooden token carved in the shape of a ring. On one side, it said Ripple. On the other, it said, Keep going. Then he hugged Clara, nodded at Jake, and disappeared into the night. As, always, a man in the shadows. But this time, the world had seen him clearly, and the world had changed because of it. The last ripple. The morning they left, the city was quiet. Clara zipped the last suitcase while Jake carried boxes down to the small van they had borrowed from a friend. The apartment, once full of laughter, letters, and late-night tears, now stood, mostly empty, except for the sapphire ring on the windowsill still catching the light. Clara walked over and picked it up carefully. "Should we take it?" she asked. Jake smiled. "We already did. Everything we needed from it." She nodded and placed it gently into a velvet pouch, not because they needed to keep it, but because they needed to honor it. They didn't have a detailed plan. No manager. No bookings. Just a map with places circled where letters had come from. They called the journey the Ripple Road. They would visit shelters, youth centers, libraries, small towns, and forgotten corners, anywhere people needed to be seen. At each stop, they invited people to share. Not through screens, not for followers, just face to face, heart to heart. They brought a small wooden box that people could drop letters into. Each letter was read, with care. And many were answered, with letters of encouragement, visits, or small acts of kindness passed on. In Colorado, a man stood up and read a letter he'd written to the son he hadn't seen in 10 years. In Detroit, a teenager with a stutter spoke for the first time in public. In Mississippi, a grandmother stood and said she hadn't been hugged since her husband passed away 5 years ago. The entire room stood up and embraced her. People weren't just hearing stories. They were becoming part of them. Then one night, in a small town in Kansas, after a Ripple gathering, a boy no older than 12 handed Jake a drawing. It was a picture of a bridge. Under it, a boy sat curled up in the cold. But in the distance, a man stood holding a small glowing ring, walking toward the boy. Beneath the drawing were the words, "Be the one who walks toward." Jake turned the drawing over. On the back was a message. "My dad left, and sometimes I think maybe I will too. But your story made me want to stay. And help others stay." Clara read the note and wept. They kept the drawing taped to the dashboard of the van. Weeks turned to months. And then came the invitation. A letter, handwritten from Martha. Yes, that Martha, the woman who had once given a sandwich to a hungry boy under a bridge. She had seen one of the Ripple films. And somehow, even after all the years, she knew the story was hers. She didn't want attention, didn't want applause. She just wanted to meet them. Not because she needed answers, but because she had something to give. So Jake and Clara drove across the country to a small coastal town where Martha now lived. She met them on her porch, a soft smile. Silver hair, warm eyes. "You're younger than I expected," she said to Jake with a wink. "And you're exactly who I imagined," Jake replied. They sat together and talked for hours. Then Martha handed them a box. Inside were napkins, dozens of them. On each one a note was written, short, kind, simple. "You matter. Don't give up. You are more than your pain. Stay kind." She had written them for years, folding them into sandwiches for strangers. She fed quietly. "I didn't know if it worked," she said, "but now, I know." Jake and Clara took the napkins, and they made a decision. They returned to Los Angeles months later, not to stay, but to open something new. Not a theater, not a stage, not a project, a home. They called it the Kindness House. Safe space for people in crisis, run by volunteers, funded by the Ripple community, inspired by one sandwich and a handwritten note. The house had no requirements, no paperwork walls, just a warm bed, a shared meal, and a box of napkins on the counter where visitors could take one or leave one. Each napkin held a handwritten message. People came from far and wide, not to be rescued, but to rest. to remember who they were beneath the bruises, one night, as Clara swept the kitchen floor and Jake read letters in the corner. The door creaked open quietly. A man stepped inside. He looked older now, his eyes softer, his steps slower. Keanu Reeves smiled. "So this is the end of the road?" he asked. "No," Jake said, rising to greet him. "This is just another ripple." Keanu looked around the house. He saw the drawings on the wall, the photos of strangers hugging, the napkin messages taped to mirrors. He walked over to the box, on the counter, and picked one. It read, "You are enough even when the world says you're not." He held it close and whispered, "I needed that today." They sat down at the table, all three of them. No cameras, no crowd, just hearts and history. After Keanu left that night, he didn't return again, not in person, but letters arrived every few months. Short, thoughtful, encouraging. Then one day a final letter came. It had no return address, just one line inside. "The ripples have reached the ocean. Thank you." Jake and Clara knew what that meant. His journey had ended, but theirs hadn't. Years passed. The ripple movement lived on, not because of fame, but because ordinary people believed in doing extraordinary things with small moments. A nurse in Poland held the hand of a dying man because she remembered a story she heard on a Ripple podcast. A teacher in Argentina started every class by reading one letter from the Ripple archive. A child in the Philippines left a sandwich and a note for a boy, sitting alone outside his school. "You matter. Stay kind." And somewhere in a quiet neighborhood, a couple sat in their kitchen, reading letters from strangers and remembering the day it all began, the day they were kicked out of a jewelry store, and the day a stranger stepped in. On the windowsill of their new home sat a familiar ring. It wasn't big. It wasn't gold. But it had changed the world. Not because of what it was made of, but because of what it meant.